Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and I did a novella this week because work, kicking my butt, needed something short. So here we are with still in the Baba Yaga series that I have been doing for the last, while. And this book follows up on the last book of the on the third book of the trilogy, last book, whatever, however you want to think of it, since last and third are the same thing in a trilogy, unless you're talking Douglas Adams, but we're not. Anyway, so in the third book, there are two important things that lead into this novella, that are the cause of this novella, rather. The first is that our heroine, Jazz, is a runaway teenager who has basically grown up in the foster care system. And she is one of those horror stories, not like the serious horror stories of, abuse and whatever, but just the story of a foster care system that's overburdened, that the social workers who work in it are overworked and understaffed and underpaid and under-resourced in terms of things like, if you paid attention to, Ontario news in, recent months, there was a whole thing about them putting up foster kids in hotel rooms because there just weren't enough foster families to place them with, never mind finding a good one. And there was a death, and it's a whole thing. But the point is that the foster care system, for all of its boons and benefits and good sides, has its problems, many of which do stem from, systemic underfunding. There are other issues, but that's one of them. And Jazz has been basically a victim of that problem, of foster families, of being an orphan who isn't young enough or cute enough to get adopted, because, orphans don't just get adopted. There's a reason why orphanages historically have been a thing. There's a reason why kids wind up just in the foster care system until they're old enough that they get kicked out and have to find jobs. There's reasons for that, and they're the same reasons that when people go to, rescue shelters for animals, that they want to leave with cute kittens and cute puppies. They don't want to leave with the tired older dogs who aren't cute or adorable and might have emotional issues. And Jazz is basically that. And so she had wound up running away and deciding, screw it, I'm just going to live in the woods, and had been doing sort of okay-ish for a while for, a city kid. And in the due course of events of the third book, she stumbles across the Baba Yaga of that third book, Bella, who recognizes, first of all, that somebody needs to take Jazz in who actually is going to care about her rather than, just sort of functioning in the system, but also realized that Jazz had a fair amount of magical potential. And indeed, Jazz turns out to have so much magical potential that Bella goes to bat for her in front of the Otherworld Queen and says, how about I apprentice her to be a Baba Yaga? And the Queen had said, yes, but she's a teenager, and we do this with children because, adults get set in their ways. It's the same reason that the Jedi only take on kids. And Bella makes the same argument that, Qui-Gon Jinn made, which is, the kid is a powerhouse, should we really just let that be running around? And so they decide, no, they're not going to, and Jazz gets to be apprenticed, and Jazz, at the start of this book, is actually kind of loving it. She now has Bella, and Bella has gotten married to her romantic interest from the third book, Sam, so she now has basically two legal guardians who are parenting her, and they're nice, but they're not overbearing. She's not being treated like she's 5, she's a teenager. But, you have the usual rebellious teenage, I know better because you're just dumb adults who don't know stuff, or whatever. The usual things. But she's basically really happy and having a great time and enjoying, doing what she's doing. But she has one problem, and it's a problem that in the books as much appears to at least partly be projection as anything else, and that is the riders. Now, we met the riders in the first book. In the second book, we were looking for them. In the third book, we found out that Brenna had kidnapped them. I talked about this already the last time. So, she kidnapped them, siphoned off their immortality such that they are no longer functionally immortal, and they are now three mortals kind of let loose in the world who are at loose ends and don't know what they're going to do, and don't know how to really deal with the fact that they're aging. They're not quite as hysterical as, the last unicorn is with the whole I can feel this body dying all around me thing. But to go from being immortal to having an actual ticking clock is going to be tremendously jarring. Along with all of the little things that they were used to from being immortal that they just don't have anymore. So, Jazz has, looked at this, and the end of this novella really does imply that at least part of what's going on with her is projection, and that is she feels like they've been abandoned because Brenna, held them captive, tortured them, did all this stuff. They are no longer what they were once before, and the Queen of the Other World basically said, well, there's nothing I can do. Tough noogies, kids. And the three, Baba Yagas have said, I got nothing. I don't know how to fix this. There's no way to fix this. And she feels like nobody's actually tried. And it's one of those things where this very obviously could be, you're a teenager and you're new to the magic thing, and they did it when you weren't watching because it was a complex magical thing that they were doing to figure this out. And so, no, you didn't see it. But to Jazz, this feels like they've just given up. Which feels to her a lot like all of those foster families where they look at this teenager and they decide, well, she's a teenager and she's still in the system. We're just giving up. It doesn't matter anymore. We don't care. And so she determines, as a Baba Yaga in training, that she's going to help the riders. She's going to get them their immortality back, and, because it got stripped from them and they deserve to be whole and who they were and so on and so forth. So she goes and she unsubtly asks Bella about constructing spells and how you go about it, because obviously as somebody who's still learning, she's not making her own spells. She is hashing out, she's practicing on everybody else's pre-made spells because, it has to do with how you learn. In the same way that, you don't learn to be an artist by trying to be, super creative. You first learn how to do the thing, and then once you have those skills, you can go to town and be creative with them. I'm not going to argue with you about the nature of doing art and whether or not thinking outside the box is aided or hampered by knowing what the box is. Though my opinion is that if you don't know what the box is, you're far more likely to reinvent all the contents of the box than you are to think outside it, because if you don't know there is a box, you're just going to think everything that you come up with is new. It's the reinventing the wheel problem. You never seen a wheel before, you invent it, you think you've come up with something new, and while that doesn't take away from your creative capacity to invent a wheel, it doesn't mean that you've done anything new. It just means you've done something someone else did before and came at it through, parallel independent evolution of thought process. In any event. So, Jazz decides to do this, and the cat on the cover, who is actually a dragon pretending to be a Maine Coon, basically offers to help her because because basically Chudo says, look, the other Baba Yagas have given up, but they haven't known the riders as long as I have. I too am immortal, and I have known them for literally centuries. Even Barbara, the oldest of them, she's 87. she's only known them for a good several decades, which is not centuries. And so Chudo says, what I will do, he says to Jazz, is I will help you collect the parts of the spell. I will help you construct it. I'll look it over. We'll hash this out. And once we have all of the parts ready, we will go to your mentor, and she can figure out how to make this work, if we can make it work, and so on and so forth. Jazz decides, in typical teenage recklessness, that she knows better, and after going on her adventure to the other world, just goes right ahead and decides to cast the spell herself. Naturally, it goes wrong, and at the end of the book, she has managed to accidentally age herself a decade because in the moment she panicked and made a wish with a thing that grants wishes in hand, and the thing made her age 10 years, and, you know, she's going to have to spend, like, a very long time in the other world basically getting all of her powers under control because she sort of managed to accidentally create a metaphorical nuclear blast with her powers. In any event, and she does not succeed at, like, you know, saving the riders or giving them back their immortality. She just manages to kind of blow things up. It's very interesting, of course, that this particular book, it leans very, very hard in one of those statements that is sometimes true in fantasy and sometimes isn't. It varies in terms of the fantasy that you're reading, because in this case, Deborah Blake is leaning very, very hard on the idea that magic is focus and intent, and a spell is strictly there to provide focus and to clarify your intent. This is even explicitly discussed when she's collecting her ingredients for the spell and thinking, you know, the various ingredients are just there to help clarify what you're doing, to sort of focus the magic and to tell it, this is what I am doing. But, you know, but in the moment, she loses her concentration, and instead of focusing on what her goal was, which was getting the riders, you know, getting the riders back their immortality, she lost that for a moment and thought that she wished she were older and wiser, and that kind of careened into the spell and messed everything up. One does actually wonder if the spell might have worked, however much to Jazz's detriment, if she had managed to actually keep herself focused, but we will never know because that's the nature of these books. And anyways, the following trilogy that was written about the three riders as they cope with no longer being immortal and having to exist in a world where they are not what they once were, that wouldn't happen if Jazz had rescued them, so, or, you know, given them back their mortality, whichever. But, yeah. So, it's an interesting little dipsy-doodle through sort of, among other things, magical theory, which there wasn't nearly as much of that. There wasn't so much of that in the other books. There was a bit, but this sort of really goes into it more because Jazz, as a, you know, student learning this, needs to get the magical theory, and so is, you know, actively thinking about how that works. Yeah, so it's a fun little book, a fun little side jaunt through this world, and I don't think I really have anything else to say, except, you know, I recommend these for people who are after a good, fun side jaunt through modern fantasy without, you know, getting too deeply serious, but with, you know, some actual stakes involved. Anyways, I think that's everything, and I will hopefully see you all next week.